in this episode.
I was trying to find an intro into this episode. We had a guest on and we went down a lot of great rabbit holes, and you can find those timestamps in the episode, whether you're on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, so you can hop around. I view this episode as more of an index than just a free-flowing conversation, even though it was.
This is the second time we've had Deven on the podcast, and he always brings a ton of really good industry insight. I feel like every time I walk away from a conversation with Deven, including this one, that we really have a better path and understanding of where we're going, especially with young pitchers. We talked about arm fatigue, training models, skills at scale, just a bunch of stuff that Deven lives day in and day out with Driveline Academy, and I thought there was some really neat takeaways from this, from probably one of our longest podcasts that we have ever had.
So I hope you guys enjoy this. This is Deven Morgan, round 2 from Driveline Academy. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of The Closing Pitch. My name is Spiker Helms, and this is a show about people, culture, and how to create a winning lifestyle. Reminder, please review the show. Also comment and then give us a subscribe. That helps us out a lot. Also, you can find Dave and myself on Twitter. Also, you'll be able to find our guest on Twitter. Mine is at Spiker Helms. Dave is at David_Birkby. And then our guest today, Deven Morgan, which I'm going to intro here shortly. His is at Deven Morgan on Twitter. Now, the person that we have today, this is round 2, and I am super excited about this. It's one of the minds that I love talking to in the baseball space. It seems like I'm learning from him through his Twitter account, but also from the original conversation. There was just a lot of good tidbits from a player development standpoint, a teaching standpoint, even from a parent standpoint. So the guest that we have is Deven Morgan. He's the director of youth baseball at Driveline. He is the founder of Driveline Academy. He was a speaker at the ABCA in 2021. He also had an awesome thread, or it was a tweet about what you were doing last year before the ABCA. You were more worried about how you were sounding before actually enjoying the moment with your son. And he's also a teriyaki enthusiast. So Deven Morgan, did I nail that intro, or is there something that you would like to add into that intro?
No, you guys crushed it. Spiker, Dave, it's great to see you guys. Yeah, that basically is the sum total of my life, right? It is youth baseball and Driveline, teriyaki, probably once every other week, and my family and a small circle of friends. And that's literally everything that I do. It all kind of is encapsulated in that very small bubble. I don't know if that means that I need more hobbies, but I don't know, man. It's just kind of how I landed here. So it's good to talk to you guys, man. I appreciate you.
Yep. Before we jump into the meat of the conversation, I want to get your takes on the ABCA. One is, were there any big surprises from your end? We mentioned it in our last episode, what we thought was interesting and what our surprises were, also our disappointments. So I'd like to get your take on that. What was your biggest surprises from the event?
Man, this is a tough one. I would say that the thing that is surprising to me is both a thing that's surprising and not surprising. I'm trying to think of how I can explain this best. I think a lot of the direction that our game is going is kind of in alignment with the things that Kyle and Mike and the people that came way before me at Driveline have kind of pushed for, which is how do we leverage technology to make coaches' lives easier, right? Mm-hmm. That's the whole point. Because you can't remove the human element for our game. I don't think anybody's looking for that, right? We're trying to think about how do we weaponize technology for coaches to help them coach more transparently, more without bias, and more to serve our customers, which is players, right? And for me, that's players probably, 9 to 14 is kind of my sweet spot. In our academy, we have, 10 to 18. And for other coaches, it's at the collegiate professional level, right? So it is, I guess, surprising to me when I see stuff on the floor at ABCA that kind of is almost kind of a pushback against that. But then I'm not surprised when I see other companies trying to advance that initiative in different ways. I think that is the stuff that fires me up. But then when you see kind of the other stuff that's okay, we're just we're pushing back on something that could help you, that could literally either make your life easier as a coach or enable you to spend more time coaching, or help to understand your players in a more transparent sense, and then help them get better. It's always surprising to me when people kind of push back about that stuff, because we talk about this sometimes on the Academy podcast. I think a lot of times when you suggest an idea that seems counterintuitive to what you grew up with in baseball, it's like I'm saying that your religion is wrong. Right? And
right.
And it's hard, if I just go like, hey man, you're wrong about the person on high that you believe in, the odds that we can have a constructive conversation out of that as like our base layer, pretty low, right? We're just not going to come to that. So when but then I see a guy like Jerry Weinstein on the floor at ABCA, right? Jerry is active on Twitter, right? Jerry is checking stuff out. I think about guys like that, and it's like, man, I really hope that as we continue to push this thing forward, that people can see him as kind of like a paradigm for what this can be, and then Tom House, even like, Tom with the Mustard app, there are, and I say this as a guy who's approaching his 46th birthday, there are elder statesmen in this game who are embracing technology. They're embracing the opportunity that it affords to help them coach more effectively. So when I see stuff by people younger than them that is almost the exact opposite in terms of just like the direction is like, well, I want to reduce the amount of feedback that my kids get, or I want to reduce the amount of feedback that I get as a coach. It's like, man, this is like cutting off your nose to spite your face territory. So that stuff is always surprising, because I think if you look at the signal all over the place, top to bottom, there are really good coaches at a variety of different levels that are able to use technology to benefit them.
But do you think that it's not necessarily old versus young? It's more of the mindset and the creativity of the person? Because if you think about I've never talked to Tom House. I would love to talk to him, but he seems like a guy that's always been on, I'm going to test the boundaries of my specific area. Do you think that's just a mindset, or do you think it is old versus young?
I think it's very much a mindset. I don't think it's colored by age in any way, shape, or form. This is very much just like the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like the more that I actually know, the less that I believe that I know.
So true.
I actually, I rewatched when we talked, it was like a year and a half or whatever it was ago. Mm-hmm. And like, man, I'm skeptical of myself. Like I am inherently skeptical and biased about like the fidelity of the stuff that I've talked about a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And if I wasn't, then I'm stagnant. And to me, from someone that like, the Carol Dweck, the growth mindset approach, I try to be as in alignment with that, I guess, at a personal level as much as possible, because I don't know, man. At the end of the day, I'm one day closer to taking a dirt nap than I was yesterday, right? And at the end of that path, I really hope that there are some fundamental principles that I've held to as a coach and a parent, as a father and a husband. But the way that those things shift and change over time, like that should be good, positive development. And it's not always going to be good, right? I mean, you're going to take next steps, but it's like, my son didn't pack a lunch this morning, and we're in the car on the way to school, and I'm like, hey man, do you have your lunch? And he's like, no. He had his braces tightened yesterday. And I was like, okay, look, you're 14 years old now. This is a moment in time you need to start taking a little bit more autonomy and a little bit more discipline with the way that you approach your life. He's 14, so he kind of gets down on himself. And I'm like, look, man, this mistake is a gift if you just learn from it. Mm-hmm. So I would say that same thing applies to the way that I coach and the way that I kind of function as an individual, right? Is that if I continue to just always try to press and grow and do better, sometimes I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get stuff wrong. I'm going to hedge my bets the wrong way. But if I always have the ability to take a clear picture about like where I was and where I got to, that affords me the opportunity to course correct over time. Mm-hmm. And again, because I'm a big believer in just like the unbiased nature of data, the more that I can leverage that stuff to actually gain clarity about what was wrong and what was right, then the better I can kind of refine this thing over time.
when you were walking that trade floor, did you go to any speakers at all? Side speakers or the large conference rooms?
I didn't get to many of them because I actually spent a ton of time on the floor. I really just tried to, when I was at ABCA last year, part of my inability to kind of get on the floor was because my anxiety level was so high about the presentation I was going to do on the youth stage that I was very much kind of locked in on trying to make sure that went as well as possible. This year, I really wanted to be on the floor. So I got a chance to see basically like every booth. I did see, the Driveline talks, Jason Ochart and Max Dudo went up and talked about the Hacking the Kinetic Chain Hitting book that's being released. And it's like, I know what's in the book. I still like to listen to those guys talk about it because then you get a chance to go like, okay, this is a coach that's performing it at a much higher level of consequence than I'm ever going to be. And to hear kind of the way that they think about that stuff is always informative for me. So I didn't get a chance to see many of the talks. I saw some of the youth stuff. It was okay.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's okay. Whether it resonated deeply for me or not, I still want to listen to that stuff because it informs my perspective on how other people think about this stuff, right? And I think for me, the way that my role is shifting, the more that I can understand that stuff, the better I can kind of refine my approach to try to reach those people, right? Like there was somebody that gave a talk that was talking about controlling the drift and kind of like pushing off the backside in pitching. And this is a really difficult thing to unpack because we've probably got like decades of guys who've been like, hey, you got to push off that rubber. And so that's one thing, right? There's another thing, which is that we understand because through biomechanics, right, that like the ability to kind of control and accelerate your center of gravity is a good thing. The tricky part is that the more that you want these things to be in balance, right? And trying to coach from a position of helping players achieve balance can be challenging, right? It's sometimes a little bit more easier to tell a guy, just push off the mound, right? But if I push off the mound too much and I sacrifice rotational velocity because I'm getting too linear in my movements, the net effect can be that I move slower and I throw slower.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have, elite rotational ability, then maybe you can afford to you can hedge your bets a little bit, right? If you don't have that luxury, or if you don't have the biology to get excessively linear without killing rotational velocity, then it can be like a net loss. But that just took me, like 2 minutes to kind of explain.
Just to unpack a little bit.
Do you think
it's complicated?
Right. Exactly.
Do you think that baseball is becoming more black and white when it comes to teaching, or do you think it's becoming even more opaque? Because if you think about other topics in other industries, so like you could go finance, you could go politics, you could go business, you could go psychology. When you start talking about it, it becomes even more opaque. Do you think baseball is like that, or do you think it's starting to become more concrete, more black and white on teaching principles?
If we really want to get into the hippy dippy side of things. So kind of think about the landscape, right? On-field biomechanics through systems like Hawkeye are something that is existing right now. There are stadiums where basically you're effectively getting almost like markerless motion capture data on the way that guys move. Mm-hmm. That technology is only going to continue to refine itself. So in 10 years, it would not surprise me if we just get like live biomech data from the way that athletes are moving on the mound, the way that athletes are performing in the box, the way that athletes are in the field. You can leverage that data to start to understand when mechanics break down relative to fatigue. There is enough information out there that correlates fatigue with mechanics breakdown with injury risk. So teams are going to leverage that data at the highest level. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen 10 years from now in youth baseball? We're not going to have Hawkeye on the field. That's never going to happen. You're not going to have recreational baseball fields that have markerless motion capture data acquisition. So what that sets up is I think we're going to have more clarity about what elite performers do and how they do it at the top level of the game. And the question is like, how does that distill itself down to lower levels of the game where you don't have that immediate like clarity of what's in the sauce? You know, we're never going to get there, right? There are millions and millions and millions of kids that play rec baseball every year on dirt fields with zero technology. My hope, and again, this gets in more into the hippy dippy side, is that we get more towards an agreed upon understanding of what is efficient and effective. And you afford kids kind of more runway to explore what that looks like relative to what they bring to the table that you cannot control, which is their biological and cognitive development. What this sets up, though, is basically like this clash of ideals, right? Do I want to make youth baseball be a place where kids are afforded a landscape to explore around clearly communicated goals and intentions? Throw the ball hard in and around this zone. Be on time, hit the ball flush, and hit it far. Can we agree upon that on that stuff, or do we kind of remain attached to this dogmatic stuff that we were brought up with, right? Keep that head still, get that front foot down early, get that back elbow up, push off the rubber, tight with your front side. I mean, all of this stuff, right? What we're going to learn at the top end of things is there's a lot more variance to movement than I think we really understand. And man, I feel like I'm talking like a crazy person, but whatever.
No, it's answering the question. That's the thing, because like I've always battled this with with conversations. Like Twitter just seems like sometimes it's the same thing said over and over again, but then you have those select few accounts that aren't worried about necessarily
catering to the masses,
but they're willing to throw out an idea and
take swords for it.
Yeah, take the sword for it. And whether you agree with them or not, like there's a lot of accounts that I follow that I don't agree with, and I don't agree with how they handle their stuff. But there's a huge but there that I am willing to listen to them because they are at least they have the I would say confidence and willing to take the sword to put that idea out there.
Sure. And I mean, I started my talk last year at ABCA with the same idea, and I have to do another talk at the Northwest Baseball Coaches Association this weekend. And when I do this stuff, I want to kind of talk first about our shared intentions. I really, truly don't think that there are a lot of bad actors in youth baseball. I coached Little League Baseball for 12 years, and I didn't get paid a single dollar for it. I didn't do that because I was trying to get rich or whatever. I did it because I love coaching kids. I love those moments where you can see them continue to grow and develop, and it makes me feel good. It makes my heart feel whole when I see that stuff happens. The path that I've kind of gone towards, and this wasn't always the case, is effectively thinking more about environments and intentions that drive mechanics. And to me, this is very much like the Bruce Lee be water thing, right? Mm-hmm. You know, water conforms to the cup, it conforms to the river, it conforms to the ocean. The intention and the objective is what I want to communicate most clearly and effectively, and I just want to run a feedback loop when the child achieves the stated intention, they understand that, and they can start to refine and lock in that movement. I think a lot of guys, we share that same intention of like, my heart feels full when a kid learns something, but they hammer it, be like, hey, okay, I need you to get that back elbow up, right? So I'm going to tie a piece of bungee cord to a kid, or I'm going to put a connection ball between their head and their in the top of the bicep and the delt to try to lock in that movement. Our intention is the same thing. We're just not kind of in alignment about the path we're trying to get there. And, you know, at the end of the day, I think sometimes we do baseball a disservice when we under-index for the amount of creativity that it requires, and we over-index for thinking the amount of precision that it requires. Like, when I think about precision, I think about like a marching band, right? Or military drills. You know, those things are performed just through like rote repetition. They do it over and over and over and over and over till they can't get it wrong, right? And it's a series of scripted movements. That's not our game. I truly don't believe that that's our game. In our game, you need 10,000 swings to try to apply to 10,000 different pitched ball locations, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, you know, when I'm pitching, I'm either 46 or 50 or 54 or 60 feet 6 inches away from a 17 to 18 inch plate, right? You're literally not going to move the same way every time. So the question is how much variance can you kind of accommodate for and control to achieve a consistent result? Especially when you're talking about children and the biological variance that you cannot negotiate around. And again, even when you're thinking about older collegiate and professional athletes, they might have less variance because their coordination and proprioception systems are much, much better, but they also have to navigate around fatigue, right? They also have to navigate around the last time that they pitched or hit. They have to navigate around the nutrition and the sleep and the training that they did the next day. That requires compensation, and compensation basically means that you have to negotiate around variability. So for the precision guy, he sees a guy dotting, the outer third and goes, okay, that's a result of precise execution of movement. What I see is the amount of compensation and variability you had to navigate to get to the same objective goal, right? To have that intention and then execute around it. So it's going to be interesting where coaching goes. Other sports lean towards a model. You think about like the Dutch soccer, like the Korver method stuff. Their system of kind of player development is all about kind of small space, minor constraint, bigger space, unbalanced constraint play. So like you're always going to have a ball at your feet. You're going to get a ton of touches, and there's going to be no opposition. And then we're going to increase maybe offset opposition. It's going to be 2 attackers, 1 defender, right? The attackers are obviously set up for success, and they have to navigate around cones or defense to try to achieve the stated goal. And then you balance it. So now it's 2 attackers, 2 defenders, and then we just play. That method of kind of like skill acquisition and skill development is very different than a lot of like little league practices. Like we put kids and go like, hey, look, the static fielding position is like alligator arm. Hey man, Francisco Lindor does not move that way.
Yeah.
And if you listen to guys like Kai Correa talk about his system, and to me Kai is just like the best in the world, and he's like an 80 grade human being, and his system of defensive development is also just like so high performing, because it takes kind of the foundational posture, position, principles that you want to have in elite fielders, and it builds them up systemically, right? It starts with kind of taking the legs out of it, so you just kind of focus on posture and presentation. And then you progressively build into a more open play space of kind of training, right? And it all revolves around simple objective goals, right? Kill the ball deep in the pocket, ideally on the index finger, bring it back in, power position, and get it out. It's just tricky, I think, for me to kind of talk about this. If you're just like an average parent that doesn't work in baseball professionally, I sound like a lunatic because I'm not giving you something direct.
Yeah.
I'm going like, hey, look, this is a very nebulous thing to define, right?
Yeah. I think an easier way to say it too, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that sometimes we forget that the game belongs to the kids and it doesn't belong to the adults.
Correct. And if we aren't on the same page about that thing, right, we can have an intention about like, hey, we have a shared intention, right? The 3 of us here, a room of 300, a room of 3,000. I want to teach kids to get better at baseball, and I want them to love the game. The question is like, does that say more about them or does it say more about me?
Yeah.
Right. And then we get down this kind of perverted path where, I think the over prioritization of winning being the only acceptable outcome at a very, very young age, it has the natural effect of kind of pushing us in a direction that I don't think is healthy, right? It pushes us towards overuse. And again, you're talking about youth baseball where the ecosystem is typically dominated by parents and coaches and parents who coach, right? Why would I put my own child's health at risk, right? I love that kid. I have a biological imperative to keep them safe. But the more that I infer that like losing is an outcome to be feared, the more that I have like more runway to kind of allow that stuff to happen. Because the thing that I fear most is like, well, what happens if my kid feels bad about losing? Well, I would offer that as a parent and a coach, your job is to provide context for that opportunity. because Tim Corbin, Mike Fox, Nate Yeske, like name a college coach, they don't care about your 12U and unders. They just don't. And even if they do care about your 13s or 14s, they only care about those kids if they're complete biological outliers, right? Mm-hmm. Your high school coach doesn't have like a survey form when you show up at tryouts to be like, what was your club record at 12U? I'm not asking that question. They truly don't care. You know, like in Washington here, you know, high school baseball, coaches have 10 days of practices, or no, it's 10 practices before they start playing games. And that typically has to include the tryout as well. We're a little bit different than a state like California, where it's much less regulated in terms of the time that they can have with kids. They have a very abbreviated time to build what they think is a competitive roster, bring that team together, and then immediately go play a game. They're not going to start that with like, okay, like, you know, what was your on-base percentage at 11U? It's not a question. But as parents, because we fear our inability to provide context to our kids about what it means to lose, in a sport where failure is almost integral to what we do, we're like, all right, well, you know, you got to go out there and you got to throw another 50 pitches today, even though you threw 90 yesterday. You know, there was a game in Long Island last summer where a 10U kid threw a 151 pitch complete game.
I want to get down that route, but before we get down that route, I said a statement last episode to Dave, and it pertains to this conversation, and I'd like to get your take on it. So I said the priority of the coach should be development, and the priority of the player should be winning. It shouldn't be reversed.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that maps to kind of like the biological and cognitive base state of kids, right? Did we talk about Jean Piaget the last time we did this?
I don't think we did. I don't think we did.
Okay, so Jean Piaget is a developmental psychologist, a Swiss guy who developed kind of a 4-stage system of understanding children's cognitive development. In his system, Piaget, the 3rd stage of that is like what's called a concrete operational stage. In the concrete operational stage, kids start to understand their world through kind of logical but concrete processes. Mom went to work. Mom is gone. Okay, mom is just gone. Mm-hmm. They understand this in like very concrete terms. The difference between the concrete operational stage and the formal operational stage is kids start to learn how to grapple with and implement concepts around abstract thought. Meaning, mom isn't gone. Mom went to work. Right? Like these two things can kind of exist side by side. Mm-hmm. I think that maps to kind of my anecdotal experience coaching youth baseball for the last decade plus, right? Kids have this definitive priority for outcome because they can't differentiate between we lost and I'm a loser. These two things are very much just like they go hand in hand because they don't have the cognitive tool to kind of understand this stuff. In Piaget's system, the concrete operational stage typically lasts from age 7 to 11. The formal operational stage, where kids start to understand these concepts around abstract thought, starts at age 12, and it lasts into adulthood. And I would offer that, like, if you think about the emotional variance that we see on youth baseball fields, and it maps to that idea that, like, the kid's priority should be winning, but the coach's priority should be development. Of course it should, right? And that's kind of the base state that these kids are going to present. And if a coach is attached to an idea of development, so long as they have a decent idea that means developing more than just your win-loss column, we're putting everybody kind of in a condition that maps to where they are, right? I want to be able to help my kids develop as much as possible, and I can provide context on either side of the equation, whether we win or loss, right? I can incentivize their effort, not their outcome. I think last time we talked, right, it was the Justin Turner thing. You know, you go 0 for 3 on the day with 3 hard hit balls, and I feel really, really good. To really hold tight to that idea, you have to have the ability to understand this in abstract, right? This is my performance today. In the box score, it was not good, but the effort and the things that I created were actually good. And if I just do them more, good things are going to come. Your average 12-year-old and younger player doesn't have the ability to kind of like grapple with that at a cognitive level, and it's just out of their control, which is why we need coaches who can offer that type of context and can support that type of stuff. And that's why one of like the most base layer non-driveline things that we advocate for is like quality at-bat sheets. Like literally, just by quality at-bats, I'm moving myself away from kind of this box score outcome derived understanding of the game, and I'm incentivizing things that are good. Hey, did you work yourself into a plus count, right? Did you take a high intent swing at hittable pitch? These are good things. Did you work like a 6 or a 7 pitch count AB? That's great. Like, there's all these minor developmentally positive actions that take place in baseball that if I measure them and then I communicate them, I have the ability to provide context to a player. And that's all that we want to do, right? Is we just want to, I can't navigate around their lagging cognitive development. I can't control it, but that doesn't mean I have to let them be a slave to it.
Is that something that you guys recommend, like from a youth coach perspective, like a 12 and under coach? Is that something that you recommend you add those types of, quality of bat charts and talking about plus counts and things into like actionable practice, and just it's a constant feed into their thought process to get them away from that win-loss mindset all the time? That guys, if you play this game at the long run, the wins will take care of themselves anyhow.
Correct. 100,000%. We have a book that's very I say that it's driveline agnostic, meaning that it doesn't talk about plyos or anything like that. It's just a bunch of games. It's like 47 different games, hitting, throwing, defense, strength games. And one of the games in there is a game that we made years ago on a dirt baseball field about 5 minutes from my house called Kill the King. And it's like a 3-level game. Round 1, you step into the box with a 2, I think it's a 2-1 count, or no, it's a 2-2 count, right? I can't afford to take a strike. I can't afford to take a ball. Second round is a 2-1 count. Now I'm a little bit more of a plus count. I'm really hunting something I can do damage with. Round 3 of that game is a 3-2 count. I just have to hit the ball hard and put something in play. What I would love to see more coaches do is kind of run games like this in practice that kind of incentivize the small actions. And then all you have to do is call those same things out in competition. And the great thing is when you think about Game Changer as a system that's kind of ubiquitous for scoring games in youth baseball, Game Changer has QABs. It's baked in. Mm-hmm. You literally can just score the game and see that stuff. Now my QAB system that I've run in youth baseball is a little bit different. I have one of my QAB things on there is I want you to smile. It's a 1-point action. If you smile, that's a point.
Game Changer cannot account for that.
In 2 years, they will.
They don't have a system for that. So that's why I'm over in the I'm an NL guy, so I'm third base dugout as much as I can be. But I'm in that third base box, and I've got my clipboard and a pen and a paper, and I'm trying to incentivize stuff like that. And you can, and if you understand that concept, you can implement that on the defensive side. You can implement that on the pitching side. Hell, you can implement that on the teammate side. Did you pick your teammate up? Hey, Timmy was trying to stretch a single into a double, got called out. Did you grab his or her bat or hat and glove and bring it out to him? Hey man, that's 10 points for me in a youth game. That's 10 points easy. Did you get in the correct position to execute a potential double cut? Did you back up that outfielder? There's so much stuff you can apply to this if you just understand the concept.
I want to go back to this fatigue thing. You mentioned was a 12-year-old or 13-year-old that threw
151 pitch CG?
Yeah.
That was a 10-year-old.
That was a 10-year-old.
If I remember correctly, I want to say that it was the 4th game that kid played or 5th game that they played in 2 days. And I believe the kid pitched in some other stuff before. There was a big thread about it on one of these Facebook travel ball forums. It's pretty wild. But yeah, it was 151 pitch CG for a 10-year-old.
And then you tweeted out because MLK weekend was a big weekend for baseball for a number of reasons. You have a lot of clubs that go down to Fort Myers and Arizona, and then they also added a Texas event as well. And how we approach it is it's a way of getting reps before the spring season, and it's a way for our best players to go down in one location. And you sent out an interesting tweet. It was quote tweeted on Josh Rudd's post. You said, "Why this stuff matters, why change is necessary," and it was a picture of a research article. And the research article said, research work done at ASMI in Birmingham, Alabama, and from the Andrews Research and Education Institute in Gulf Breeze, Florida, has proven that if a young baseball player plays with fatigue, there's a 36-to-1 increased incident that they can injure their throwing shoulder and or elbow. My question is what qualifies fatigue? And I think we know the answer now, but when I saw that, I really wanted to ask that because, again, I'm big on psychology and like what words mean, and sometimes the word meaning can get lost depending on who you're talking to. What do you mean by fatigue and avoiding fatigue?
So this is one that takes a lot of unpacking.
Yes.
It's really complicated, right? And Josh is putting together some people that are kind of looking at some of these events, like the stuff that happened at MLK, and just kind of looking and going like, hey, Perfect Game is an organization that has select compliance, if I remember correctly, with the MLB PitchSmart standard.
Mm-hmm.
Select compliance is different than like mandatory compliance, which is what Little League, Pony, Rifkin, and some other large organizations have kind of prescribed. If you are mandatory compliant, you have to stay within the guidelines of MLB PitchSmart. If you are select compliant, that means that in select events, you will hold yourself to that standard. It begs the question, like, well, where are these events, right? Because certainly, if you look at some of those counts over the MLK weekend event or others, right, they're not compliant with MLB PitchSmart. So what we're talking about with fatigue is generally just that, like, as you continue to perform an activity, you are going to, you're going to get drained a little bit, right? Like if I just get down on my floor right now and I knock out like 5 push-ups, I'll probably feel fine. If I waited 30 seconds and I knock out another 5, I'll probably still feel fine. If I wait another 30 seconds and on and on and on, to the point that I'm on like my 10th or 20th set of 5, I'm going to start to be fatigued, right? So that's kind of what we're generally talking about, right? Is that the more that we accumulate activity, in this specific sense, we're talking about pitching, all of that kind of just takes away from my overall level of throwing fitness and energy to be applied in sport activity.
So technically you're saying the fatigue means if I throw back-to-back days, my body is not going to be prepared to throw and it's going to be able to support my arm.
Well, this is where it gets really tricky, right? Because what I just talked about, like sets of 5 accumulating over and over and over and over, right? The first time that I do that, by the time that, in my current level of push-up fitness, the first 10 sets that I have of 5, I'll probably be okay. The second sets of 10 are going to start looking pretty crappy. The third sets of 10s, I'm probably not like, I'm just not there right now, right? Human beings basically like respond and react to the stimulus that they're given. Okay. So I think that the reason that some people are concerned about the MLK weekend pitch counts is kind of like as a singular event is that they conclude, and I don't know that this is an accurate conclusion, but the conclusion is that you haven't had enough time to kind of build up to those type of workloads, right? Because that is a thing that you can do. What we understand with tools like Driveline Pulse is basically that you want what we would call your on-ramp, right, for kind of that workload to be a gradual curve upward, and then you want to maintain it. And I think some people ask what are relatively, reasonable questions to go like, okay, well, we're throwing with this type of frequency in this type of volume in January. Is that something you've adequately been onboarded towards? And that's a tricky question to answer, right? Everybody's going to have a different answer because everybody's throwing programs are different. With our academy teams, we take August and September off from throwing entirely. We start off-season training in October. We take like a 4 to 5 week onboard, And that's the first time we start throwing with anything resembling intent, whether that's off the mound, flat, plyos, or whatever. Then we go into a velocity phase. It's typically around 5 to 6 weeks. That concludes right around December. And then we start building up volume. So it's like what we do is we kind of like slowly on-ramp period, and then we build into intensity, and then we build up volume. So I don't know go ahead.
So what confuses me on this debate is like, I've been seeing the debate, and I overall I think it's healthy. But what confuses me is that sometimes I feel like the human nature starts coming out and we're blanketing everybody under one umbrella when it, like you just said, it's an individual basis and it's very different. Like, and I think from coast to coast, and one benefit from, like, if you talked to me 5 years ago, I would have been like, hell yeah, let's not play in these months. But now seeing coast to coast, that's just not feasible because Vegas operates completely different than St. Louis, and then St. Louis operates completely different than, let's just say, Houston, Texas, or a Miami. Like, Miami and Vegas don't operate the same way, even though they're warm weather climates, which is crazy to think about. But like, and I don't know what the answer is. And I just hope that we don't go in this route of like, the worst thing that regulation can do to someone is then bind them to something when a Dominican or a Venezuelan kid or a Japan kid, whatever, they can work a whole year round, and then we're limiting our players to, okay, this is what you're only capable of because we have deemed it as adults that you are fatigued, when in reality you might not be fatigued.
Right. It's a really tough thing to kind of come up with a universal solution for, because there's no universal agreed upon throwing program. There's no universal agreed upon schedule.
100%.
And because you don't have those two things, you can't have just like a one size fits all perfect solution. I would offer that, the MLB PitchSmart guidelines are a pretty good middle position, right? I don't know that MLB PitchSmart ever actually released all the research that led into the creation of that standard. If I'm wrong, I'd hope that somebody would please tell me. I'd love to see it. But my understanding is that kind of just they took some information and tried to come up with some like best case scenario guidelines for usage. Now, what was before MLB PitchSmart, if I remember correctly, was more of like an innings-based approach, right? And innings are tricky because we're talking about youth baseball. You could have a 12-pitch inning, or you could have a 50-pitch inning, and I've seen either sides of the equation, right?
And what's also tricky about that is that you have a limited amount of players on a youth roster. That's where people are getting stuck, is that like everyone agree. Like I wouldn't say everyone, because you do see the crazies where they end up throwing the 150 pitch count and they don't care. But overall, I think 90% of people agree, let's not destroy a kid's arm. Right. I feel like that's a little child abuse at some degree. If you're just like, all right, go out there again, Timmy, and let's see what you eat it and rip it.
And then even a secondary to that, I think that most people agree that they understand the correlation between, if you're really fatigued and you're trying to perform an activity at your highest level of performance, you're probably, if you're really hurt, you can't run a mile, right? It just all makes sense. So, but I think where the disconnect comes, at least in my opinion, which is why I'm very happy that tech is now being filtered down to the lower levels and becoming more affordable in a couple cases I can explain. But I think the disconnect is where coaches or maybe parents or even players, and you can't put it on the players as much, it's more on the coaches and parents, I think, they don't understand where that level of fatigue might be. The old adage was, how are you feeling this day? Are you feeling okay? Are you up to it? Kind of watching your body language type of thing. And that's, that doesn't really give you a picture. But now there's certain things that are coming down the route, if you will, of technology that can actually give you're at this level of recovery. You're at this level. Based on the information that you're giving me, you're now at that, which that's how we search for answers. That's how maybe you can, I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Well, I think that's absolutely, in a perfect world, I think you have to individualize it, right? Because again, let's say a kid throws, 60 on a Friday and 60 on a Sunday at Lake Point, right? So that's 120 pitches. And let's say that kid's 12 years old. If you look at the MLB Pitch Smart standard, that would be just a very blatant violation of that standard.
Correct.
Right? Just on the surface of it. Now, if that kid started onboarding in October, and starting in November, that kid had 50 to 60 pitch bullpens, or let's say they progressively built up to the point that in December, they start having 60 pitch bullpens on Friday and Sunday. And you do that for all of December and half of January. So you essentially have like 6 weeks to accumulate to that volume. I think you could make the argument that for that player in that kind of training paradigm, that because they've had 6 weeks to kind of acclimate to that they would be able to do that in Lake Point successfully without a drastic risk of injury.
They'd be better suited than most.
Yeah, because you had time to essentially to adapt to that stimulus. Now, the tricky problem, of course, is that what are you missing if you kind of go down that path? Were you missing the opportunity to learn how to get stronger and move faster?
Correct.
But it's not for me to say unilaterally for every coach in this country, hey, you should always do it the way that we do it, right? That's never going to happen. We're never going to get into any type of agreement there. So, you could build a kid up to that, right? But the only way that you would get kind of like systemic clarity on that is really two paths. One is you individually basically track all of those players' throws in training that leads up to that competition, right? And as much as I would love to sell, a Driveline pulse sensor to 2 million kids every single year, I don't think that that's going to happen. The other way that you could do it is you essentially track velocity, right? Because velocity is going to give you an indicator into fatigue once you understand what a kid's baseline is, right?
Right.
So let's say you got a 12-year-old, they throw, mid sixes. Okay. If that kid holds in and around mid sixes for all 60 pitches on Friday, great. I feel like we're in a good place. And if they go into that Sunday start and they hold in and around mid sixes for the first 20, 30 pitches, okay, fine. But in pitches 31 through 40 and 40 through 50 and 50 to 60, as I start to see a gradual decline in output, that to me is a pretty clear signal that something is going on in terms of fatigue. And it's at that point that I would start being concerned that we are putting ourselves in that position where now I'm kind of, my presentation is like the research, right? As fatigue goes up, mechanical breakdown goes up, and the risk of injury goes up.
100%.
And the tricky thing about all of this that we understand through biomechanics is just kids at a base layer don't produce a ton of force on a per throw basis. Because they're kids, right? They're not small adults, they're kids. So the reason that you don't see kids having a lot of single throw injuries is because they just don't produce a bunch of force on a per throw basis. What they do is they're resilient, but they're not bulletproof. So you can get into a tricky spot where basically this continual accrual of workload inhibits your ability to adequately recover, right? So if that kid hadn't been throwing, Friday, Sunday, 60 pitch bullpens, and you only threw a 20 pitch pen once a week, and you did that from December into the first half of January, and then you go, hey, all of a sudden we're just going to go 60 on Saturday and 60 on Friday, 60 on Sunday. That is the situation to avoid, because instead of seeing a gradual accumulation of workload and then essentially holding that, it's a spike in workload. We are entering into a depth in the pool that we haven't swum at yet. And that's the place that gets a little concerning.
Yeah, I think overall, growing the game, that's one of my priorities, and just that's one of our missions and our goals as a club. And just being able to eliminate 2 months out of the year where you can't play baseball just doesn't seem like a very feasible and great option for the game when the game is not being adopted at a rate that it used to be. I'd want the kids to play as much as they want, and being able to make that offer, and it's up to that kid to play or not play. But I do think that I agree with you, which is there needs to be more education.
Yeah.
And I don't think coaches have that education yet, which is no fault of their own because they don't live in this space like we do. We live it day in, day out. The guy who runs a mortgage company, he's trying to think about how to take care of his employees, and no fault of his own. He's trying to do his best and he's volunteering his time. And then he's like, oh crap, I just threw the kid 80 pitches, 90 pitches, and I shouldn't have done that.
Well, you have to educate coaches, and you have to come up with something that's flexible because so much of this stuff is regional, right? Like, we in the Northwest, we start our off season in October, and we don't play in August and September. We don't, right? My team. We're giving away good weather in August and September.
Right.
We end up having to play, sometimes in February and March and April when the weather is terrible.
Yeah.
But the reason we do that is because our first high school baseball practices are typically the last day in February. So kind of we have to take that thing and run it backwards from that, right? So if we just had like a blanket, like, hey, every state in the nation, and our great nation is going to have a no throw in August, September, man, that just ain't going to work.
Yeah.
Right.
You need kind of a flexible standard. You need education to coaches. But the only other thing that I'd offer is just like, I 100% agree about this idea of like, we want to grow the game and afford kids the opportunities to play it. And again, I realize I sound like a crazy person here, but think about the thing that we like hold in highest regard, right? What we hold in highest regard typically is like neighborhood play, movies like The Sandlot, right?
Yeah.
Kids will play until they're either they get tired or the lights go out. What that environment really is, it's self-regulating. Like the kids play until they're tired and then they're done, or they might go a little bit above that and they're done. That's a very different thing than me as a coach going up to one of my players and going, hey, how do you feel in a tournament?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point.
Because not only if I go, hey, we're in a tournament, the kids, they're not dumb. Like they might be cognitive and developmentally behind, but they're not. A lot of them aren't stupid. They understand that there's one team in our division that's going to get this stupid trophy, and I want to win a trophy, right? So the moment that I go out into the bump and I'm like, hey, how do you feel? I have to acknowledge that there's some power dynamic involved in there. And again, like, what do we love, right? Like, it's that moment of like David Cohn, being like, hey, you're not pulling me out of this game. Like, I love that stuff, right? As someone that loves this game very deeply, I have to be the adult in the equation when it comes to a 12 or an under kid on the bump. And I think that there are ways that we can have kids play that aren't this thing, right? It's not, hey, we're going to play at least a 3-game guarantee over 2 days, and it might be as many as 5 or 6. There's a different way that we could structure this thing where we're playing, but we're not putting ourselves in that box. The moment that I step into that tournament box, I have to kind of accept some of the stuff that trails with that, which is I'm kind of cultivating the thing that I want, which is a kid to just be like, hey, yeah, man, coach, I got you. I got you for another 5 innings, or I got you for another 20 pitches, right? Whatever. But if I'm remaining kind of like an intentionally ignorant position about what that kid's output looks like, or what their fatigue level starts to look like, or I am putting the value proposition of my club, which is winning, ahead almost accidentally of the other thing, which is development and keeping kids healthy. Mm-hmm. Now I'm just kind of putting myself in a position of natural conflict, and I realize that's an incredibly like difficult thing for anyone to tolerate, because that's a tough thing for parents to tolerate, right? The way that a lot of parents understand their kids' team is the same way that they relate to like their professional team. Like last summer, we were in a tournament, and I went to the restroom, and there was a kid that was walking out of the bathroom and another parent walking in, and the parent stops this kid who is, I don't know, 12 maybe. He's like, hey, you guys got to get the bats going today. Johnny, what happened 45 seconds before, right? Johnny's sitting there on the bench. He's like, man, I got to go to the bathroom. Hey, coach, can I go? And the coach is like, fine, hurry up. And the kid runs over there and he gets in the bathroom and he's just trying to get back to the dugout. And this parent is like lighting him up. And I don't know if it was the actual kid's parent or just another parent on the team, but he's lighting this kid up. He can't even get out of the bathroom about the team's performance. Like, what does that tell you? You know, like if I was in the club seats at a Mariner game behind home plate and I'm like passing Julio Rodriguez in the walkway, there's no way that I would say that to him. I might say that to my wife as we watch the game on my couch. I wouldn't say that to a professional athlete. But a lot of times, like we understand that children are children everywhere but on a baseball field, right? And we kind of like, we relate their whole experience the same way that we relate to our experience with like professional adults. And I just think that that's the wrong path. But to me, you know, one of the ways you just naturally solve this stuff is like, how can we play games without playing the game?
Yeah. I mean, that was a really good point on self-regulation on the Sandlot, and kids, when they're tired, they're like, you know what, I'm done. And I've been kicking this idea around too, which is maybe you just don't do bracket play. Maybe the tournament companies are required to do 5-game guarantees. And then whoever has the lowest score differential or whatever and have the best record, they end up winning the tournament, and then it's announced on Twitter or Facebook. I feel like that's a more reasonable option than, all right, we're going to do a 3-game guarantee, and then also if you make it past this, you give like 5-6 more games to actually win the ship. So good luck. Like it's literally impossible, which then would allow a coach to build out his roster that makes sense for everybody. Instead of doing 11 players or 12 players, now he can do like 13, 14, 15 players and know like, okay, hey, now I have 5 games that I have to play in this tournament this weekend, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, first off, I'm certainly happy that this conversation is happening and what's going on social media. It needs to happen. It needs to be brought to attention. But it's not a one solution problem. It takes absolutely everybody to kind of talk through this because it is so complex. I mean, so complex. You're taking into a factor of different paces across the country, different age groups, different bodies, different coaches, different systems, different tournament companies, different offerings. I mean, it is so complex. But there can be, I don't know if there's ever an ultimate solution, but there's certainly some areas of improvement. And I think that's where people need to be open to listening to those. And I think if you bring in everybody, the tournament companies, the coaches, the organizations, the parents, the masters on that side, the high-level professionals, if you bring everybody in, I think that you'll find at least that conversation isn't going to be not worthwhile. That conversation is going to lead to some sort of improvement of the game.
Yeah, because again, you see former Major League Baseball players coaching these teams on MLK weekend, which is another thing to think about. Is like, these guys think it's fine to play during this, and why is that? Well, probably because their kids have been trained and have been playing, and they can play that weekend, right? So it's like, it goes back to his point. There's so many variables. So many variables.
But it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah, and it's just, I think a lot of this, again, you can't lose sight of the fact that, like, while you do have, some people that have played incredibly high-level baseball in this ecosystem, a lot of it just it's executed and conducted by parents.
100%.
Yep.
And again, like, when you think about the self-regulation thing on the Sandlot, the other thing that the Sandlot regulates for is, like, literally talent. I mean, you think about that movie, all those kids on that field weren't good. Like,
except Jet Rodriguez.
Right. You got one of those. And then you have all these other kids who have differing abilities. And when you put a coach, a well-intentioned parent coach in an environment where, like, hey, there's just like one outcome that we're going to find acceptable and everything else I don't have any tolerance for, I naturally go like, all right, well, what's the best way that I like hedge my bets there? I get the biggest and the strongest kids, calendar age 12, biological age 14. Well, again, there's research that substantiates this in sports like hockey, where like late blooming kids end up being incredible high performers so long as they continue to play the game, because they cultivate this sense of like dogged perseverance. And I would argue our game relies upon perseverance much more than hockey does, right? Because
right.
Failure and challenge is so inherently baked in. But if we continue to move in the direction we are, where there's more and more travel teams that are incentivized around one specific outcome, what is naturally going to happen is that like we're just going to continue to carve some of those kids away that are late bloomers, right?
Yep.
That might not be developed yet to be competitive. That doesn't mean they're going to be they can't be competitive later. They just need time and reps and play opportunities. But like, you know, I mean, how many of those kids are getting carved out of roster spots or just moved to other sports, you know? Because like the more that we lose kids from recreational baseball to travel ball, you know, like you lose like that top 10% of your players from rec ball because they're like the most gifted athletes. They might be biologically advanced, skill advanced, whatever. Those kids go play travel ball, they abandon rec ball. So now you've lost your 10% of your skilled players in rec ball. You're also losing a lot of your best board members and coaches because a lot of those kids, the reason that they're good is they have a parent like the three of us who just like is very deeply involved with this thing. It's going to let them hit in the backyard 3, 4, 5 times a week, right? So then the next like 20% of your talent, they're like, oh, well, the competition level just left or got bad. So then I'm going to go to travel ball too. So now your rec ball league loses like the top 30, 40% of it. And then the competition level of rec ball goes really, really bad. And think about things like first year kid pitch is like a real tough scene anyways. If the kids go out there and they're expected to like play like a 6th inning technical baseball game and nobody can throw a strike and nobody can hit, that kid's going to play for like 1 or 2 weeks and be like, hey, mom, dad, I don't want to do this anymore. Right. And now kids don't have the ability to learn how to cultivate this sense of perseverance. You know, like the beautiful and infuriating thing about our game is how flippin' hard it is, right? Like that's the thing that we love. But to learn that, you gotta have some sense of competence. You have to learn like the joy of it first before you learn like this pressing failure loop, right? And
so what's what's the answer of increasing game adoption? Because you basically you painted a really good picture of what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years. And again, I think that it's a net positive overall, but there is some issues with game adoption where these kids that want to learn the game and want to play the game, they're not being able to learn the game properly because those better kids were also teachers on the field. Like I remember when I was playing, I played up in age and I learned more by playing around them than I did with my coaches. Like it was at that age group, I just looked at what someone was doing and I looked at Nick and I was like, that's what Nick's doing. So I got to do what Nick's doing. Well, now you don't have Nick and you have a whole bunch of me's out there and we're trying to figure out how to play this game and we fall flat.
So a couple things. If you look at our national governing body, which is USA Baseball, right? USA Baseball has a very clearly defined intention about what this thing is supposed to be, right? Almost at a per age level. If you go to usabaseball.com, they have resources for coaches and parents and players about kind of like as a per age basis what we should be working towards. And what that is basically like skill acquisition, fun, and engagement as our base. And then we kind of refine like the technical gameplay stuff, right? That's largely out of step with the way that our game is actually conducted on the ground floor. And I would say that that's true not only in travel ball at like the 9U level, but also in rec ball. Man, I've seen incredibly contentious 10U or rec ball games, right? Because we aren't putting skill acquisition, fun, and engagement first. We're putting, I need to perform within the technical boundaries of this game and I need to win. We put that first. We put the technical skill, we put the skill acquisition, fun, and engagement later. So the first thing for me is like, we have to start thinking outside of the box about the way that we introduce our game to kids in an engaging fashion. That literally is the first thing. And again, you know, I think we talked about this before we actually started recording, but part of the, you know, ABCA's, opportunity, the American Baseball Coaches Association, you know, Rob Haney and Ryan Brownlee are just like the highest quality baseball men, you know, some of the highest quality baseball men that I've ever met because they see this thing with clear eyes and they understand kind of ABCA's opportunity to play Switzerland and communicate to parents that like your role isn't so much to be a coach, it's to be a facilitator. the more that you can kind of facilitate joy and enjoyment in this game and introduce skills at a scaled down level and then progressively build those things up over time, the better that we have an opportunity to develop that skill floor early, we have more runway to teach the technical game later. But so long as, again, we have like, first year kid pitch and like, hey, the expectation is you're going to play 3 up, 3 down, and it takes you 2.5 hours to get through like 2.5 innings, that sucks. It's not good. And you have that kid out in the outfield that's picking daisies, and we're like, well, how dare you not be engaged in this game? That kid's behavior is going to tell you the truth of how engaging this activity is.
Yep.
Right. So for me, again, I realize I am like an absolute crazy person here, but like for that stuff, man, I would rather have 3 stations of home run derby and like 3 stations of like round robin, target throwing, and 3 stations of like infield, outfield games that we could play. And I would do that for 6 weeks, and then I would do 6 weeks of games. So ideally, we're progressively kind of building into the thing that we need to. You can't unilaterally neglect that we need to technically learn how to play baseball eventually. The question is, do we start from like 0 to 10, or do we kind of progressively build into this thing? And to me, that I think is just going to give kids a much more engaging initial experience in our game that also substantiates the skill development that we don't want to be lagging, and then we can progressively like dose them into playing the technical game over time.
Well, I mean, what variations do you see of the game? There's not many variations to our game. Where soccer, you have futsal, you have indoor soccer. I mean, they play a lot of different games inside of practice. Basketball, they lower the hoops, they shorten up the court. Baseball, we just shorten up the field, and then we say, all right, this is the game, good luck. And then we might put a machine out there, and that still doesn't solve anything.
Yeah, and when we play 3 up, 3 down, right? I mean, it's essentially the same. And even with like the early, like the first year machine pitch, right? I mean, a lot of times we're doing that from 46 feet away. We're not reducing the task complexity. The only thing I'm reducing is the human element. And for me, like, for the first like, the first 6 weeks of like a coach pitch, I would rather have us just doing like side soft toss. Like let's drastically reduce the task complexity, make it much more likely kids can find barrels, which means that on the defensive side, there's actually more activity, and then progressively like expand that over time. I think the more that you can kind of like reduce the task complexity and then gradually increase it, we have the ability to just like the initial dosage of our game, the way that we present it is just the engagement part and the fun part, and actually having action happen is just, it's so important, because the moment that you put that kid out there in right field, they're probably already feeling stigmatized because they're so just like drastically reduced to it. And then, no balls get hit to them. They start picking at their shoelaces in the dirt and the daisies, or they're picking up turf or whatever. And like, we just don't need to present our game that way. And that probably means what you need is you need to run smaller rosters, right? And you probably need more coaches, because if you're going to run smaller rosters with the same body of players, you need more coaches, need more help. So for again, the thing we're talking about at ABCA is like, how do I make parents understand that your job as a facilitator is not to be Tom House. Your job is not to be an elite hitting instructor. You just need to run small games that are fun, that drive the skill that we need over time, and then progressively kind of build us towards like playing the technical game.
This is awesome. How quickly? Well, personally, my opinion is, if this doesn't change at the younger levels within the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see with the way technology is and the way you see just the overall attention span of young people these days and everything else, you're going to see a massive fall off. And there's just too many other options, too many other things out there for young people to do. They're getting pulled in a million different directions. And if you supply them with the current standard thing that's going to lose their attention real quick because it's a high failure rate game, they're not going to like it. Like you say, they're going to leave in two weeks. We're going to see a lot of kids leave the game. So the question is, and I don't know if you have the answer or anything, but how soon can we get any sort of that type of idea implemented?
Ideally 2024. That'd
be awesome.
That's what our youth committee at ABCA is working on.
Okay.
Not to put the cat out of the bag or the cart before the proverbial horse, but we're really talking a lot. And again, like all credit due to Ryan Brownlee and Rob Hawley with ABCA about trying to communicate a clear set of kind of what you need to know and how you need to do it for parents to just be a facilitator of this game at the lowest stages of things. I really think that that's the best thing that we can do.
Another thing that I think is an issue too is that you have a disconnect between the leagues. Like you have Babe Ruth, Pony, Ripken, and then you have travel ball. I think there's just a huge disconnect there. Do you think that there's a chance to where everyone can come into a room and actually say, all right, this is what we're going to be focusing on and this is what we're going to be focusing on? Or is that just a pipe dream and a fairy tale and it'll never work?
I mean, I don't know if my naivete is showing, but I think that that's possible, right? And the reason that I think that's possible is because the problem is something that we're all going to suffer equally from, right? If you look at what the Aspen Institute has done with Project Play Initiative over the last, I think they started in 2018 or 2019, baseball loses more participants at a disproportionate rate compared to any other sport when kids transition onto a 90-foot field. Like that is a fact of what's happening. And I've brought this up before, and people tell me that like, oh, that's just because, like Little League baseball is kind of ubiquitous, and there's a lot of kids that play, Little League, and then they just kind of naturally rode over time. And I understand, that natural stratification happens. But again, the point is that it is a disproportionate rate compared to any other sport. So the question is why? Well, when you're faced with a 262% increase in play space between a 46-60 field and a 60-90, the destination that I think we want to work towards, which is 90-foot baseball, which is the opportunity you put on spikes for the first time and you walk out of the dugout and you hear the way that those things sound different than your plastics. I'll never forget that moment, right? I will never, ever, ever forget that moment. I'll never forget what it felt like to actually be on a big field for the first time. I think the issue that we're running into is the kids are just like fundamentally ill-equipped because of the construction of the game at the youth level to be competitive, to have what it takes to play on 90. And that's not because they're unprepared or they can't do it at a biological level. We're human beings. We adapt to the stimulus that we're given. We're just hyper optimized for one specific environment that's very different than the inevitable environment, right? This is just a place that you're going to get you. If we do our jobs, again, we have the same shared intention of trying to build kids that love this game and want to play it for as long as possible. 90-foot baseball should be inevitable. But if you're not set up for success there because you optimize for the wrong thing, I think that's the reason that we have a disproportionate participant loss. And that's something that all of us are suffering from. Travel, rec, Pony, Ripken, Little League, Ruth, all of it, right? So how do we create more kids who are even playing Babe Ruth, right? Like Babe Ruth in Legion Ball was the thing. Again, I'm very old, but like it was like he played Little League and then it was Ruth or Legion or whatever. My understanding is the registration in those leagues are not as high as they once were. Well, why is that? Because we don't have as many kids that are actually able to play 90-foot ball. So, again, my naivete may be showing, but my hope is that if we just kind of understand that these are facts that all of us are going to have to navigate around, right? You might have less players at 15U, 16U, 17U, and 18U just because you carved them out early or you optimized for the wrong thing too early. How do I want to change that? Well, we have to change the entire structure of everything that leads up to it. You got to start from the bottom up.
Also, I think there was a lot of misplacement too. Disruptors. Perfect Game would be number one on that list. They did a huge disruption to the space back when they first started, which again, I think net positive overall for players. I think it's net positive. I think it's also an identity thing for, like we talk about it here at the Tigers. We're always trying to figure out, okay, where do we want to niche ourselves and what do we want to really focus on? And how do we want to focus on it? And I think the baseball space in general, everyone goes after that elite player. Well, what happens to those other players? That's where it gets kind of the muddy waters start happening and the game adoption doesn't happen. And that's what we've been focusing on for the last year. We've been really focusing on game adoption and growth of the game. So, but for everyone that doesn't know what Project Play was, I wanted to make sure that everyone knows what that is. That's the Aspen Institute Sports and Society program. It's the award-winning initiative. Coven's leaders, identifies gaps in access to quality sports activity, and mobilizes organizations for action. And it was established in 2013. And they really hit the scene that Deven mentioned on 2018, 2017. That's when they kind of got on my radar too. But they have some really good information out there if you want to go do some research on your own, if you want to be a nerd like us. It's aspenprojectplay.org. I want to talk about skills at scale. That's something that you say a lot, and I think that'd be super valuable to players and parents and coaches. Could you kind of dive into that?
Sure. So, in a technical sense, skills at scale is our framework for kind of the way that we conceptualize youth development, right? We have just a little bit more of our chips on the side of the table on the hitting and throwing skills, because that is just, all the action in our game is predicated on hitting and throwing, right? Like that's the there's nothing more fundamental than baseball than your ability to throw the ball and hit the ball, right? Everything happens off of that. So in a technical sense, our hitting skills at scale is bat speed and exit velocity. Bat speed is important because what I was told a very long time ago, that the pitcher supplies the power, is just a lie. That's not true. Thanks to the work of Dr. Alan Nathan at the University of Illinois, we understand that for every mile an hour of bat speed you produce, you generate 1.2 miles an hour of exit velocity. For every mile an hour of incoming pitch speed, that contributes to 0.2 miles an hour of exit velocity. That's assuming for the same collision efficiency between round ball, round bat. So if you want to hit the ball hard, and hitting the ball hard is a good thing, you just have to move the bat fast, right? As you hit the ball harder, better outcomes generally present themselves. This is in complete directional alignment with everything that like Ted Williams was talking about in Science of Hitting many, many, many years ago. So for us on the hitting side, we're kind of talking about bat speed as like output, and exit velocity is like the application of output, right? We're not saying that bat speed in and of itself is something that is like the only thing that we track, because if you're just swinging the bat fast and like swinging at air, that doesn't solve our problem, right? We want to be able to do that against a moving ball relative to kind of what the competition environment is. On the throwing side, it's throwing velocity, but it's also throwing accuracy and then also health, right? Like throwing the ball hard is good. The more that we kind of understand your baseline kind of velocity your baseline velocity, we also can monitor for fatigue. We also want you to be able to throw the ball in and around the target, because whether you're pitching or whether you're in the field or whether you're playing catcher, you have to be able to kind of try to hit a spot. We want to understand these things differently, kind of both separately and also together, because I'm not expecting children to perform with an amount of like motor control that I expect adults to do. So I kind of have to understand both of these things. And, my anecdotal experience is that the easier path and the better path is to basically like meet kids where they are. Kids can't stack on muscle, right? They don't have the testosterone to be able to do that. They can't like engage in like the systems of hypertrophy and tendon stiffness that allows me to try to get strong as an old man. Kids can't do that. What kids can do is they can basically like the neurological side of things, software changes they can make. They can't make hardware changes. They can't make software changes. So the amount of basically like forced recruitment that they can generate is something that you can develop with a kid, even though you can't stack muscle on them. So for us, in terms of skills at scale, what we want to do is like, all right, if you can't make hardware changes, but you can't make software changes, we want to put you in environments that drive these things, right? How do we help you learn how to get good at moving fast? Moving fast doesn't mean remaining ignorant of kind of the task demand, right? You can't just move the bat fast and not hit the ball. You can't throw the ball hard and not hit your spot. We need to understand both of these things, but we understand they're also going to develop at different rates, right? So we prioritize these things in the way that we train our teams and kids in our program, because they're necessary ingredients, again, for this inevitable shift in play space, right? You go from a 40,000 square foot field to about 105,000 square foot field. On a 90-foot field, that throw from like the 6 hole is 120, 130-ish feet. That's That's a substantial difference than if you were just like playing shortstop at 46-60 from 9 to 12, and then you never knew that you needed to be able to throw the ball hard. So you show up that first time in a 90 field, you're like 2-3 hopping throws. It's tough to feel competent and competitive in that arena. So growth of scale is just this idea that, like, again, hitting and throwing are just kind of the most fundamental things to me about what our game necessitates, not only for competitiveness now, but also for competitiveness as the landscape changes. We just want to have a little bit more of our chips on that side of the table. You incentivize everybody's development. You put them in an environment where they are free sometimes to move fast and swing and miss. That doesn't mean that I want them to swing and miss. What it means is that we're going to get better at sprinting by sprinting, not by jogging. If that speed is a necessary ingredient for hitting the ball hard, I just need to give, again, I'm communicating a very clear intention to a kid. Hit the ball hard. What does that mean? I have to be on time. Okay, I need to have an attack angle that's relative to the defense angle in the incoming pitch, and I have to move the bat fast. The more that I can give a kid an opportunity to go like, hey, I just need you to learn how to do that, the better they're going to get at it and the better that they apply that tool.
So are you saying you can teach force and speed, or are you saying force and speed are something that we're going to deal with later on? We just want them to understand that the player needs to create that force and speed and do as much as they possibly can, but the things that we can control are eye-hand coordination and bat path and actually catching the baseball. Is that what you're saying, or am I? I'm saying
we can teach it.
Okay.
You know, like I'm just saying that these are things that can be taught. Now, the thing that I will grant you is that these things certainly will develop just through biological process, right? Like kids will naturally throw the ball harder, and they'll naturally move the bat faster, given no stimulus, just because of biological development. What I don't want to do is regurgitate the stuff that I remember, again, 30 years ago, that like, oh, you're going to wait for your velocity. Like, again, like why would that be a thing? Human beings are adaptable to the stimulus and the stress that they get. These concepts are very just kind of fundamental. Things like progressive overload, right? Progressive overload is basically like the fundamental way that any like strength program works. And it's also the way that something like a Couch to 5K app works, right? Or the Road to 100 push-up works, right? All these things are just like taking advantage of progressive overload and the way that the human body responds to stimulus. The American, the American Society of Pediatricians or the American Association of Pediatricians or whatever the big pediatric group has said on record since 2000, I want to say it's 2015 or 16, that resistance training is safe and appropriate if supervised for kids starting at age 8.
So, but I want to make sure that we clarify this for everybody. This doesn't mean that you're deadlifting 215.
Please, Lord on high, don't do that, right? And what we're talking about, again, appropriate is really like a foundational principle, right? I don't think that anybody thinks that like a 1-rep RDL for an 8-year-old is a good idea. What we're talking about is essentially putting kids in environments where they get a chance to produce force and accept force and change directions and move fast. We want to learn how to do these things. And the more that we can kind of do them, the better we get at them. And a lot of this stuff really just starts as kind of like general physical presentation that informs baseball skills, right? Like the big knock on year-round baseball is overuse. Well, why is that? Because you're spending too much time doing baseball-specific movements, which doesn't afford you the opportunity to do non-baseball specific movements that inform your baseball movements, right? Like we love this idea of multi-sport play. And we go, hey, the top 30 guys in the draft this year, all of them played multiple sports in high school. Great. I get that. Those 30 guys, probably 29 of them, or maybe all 30 of them, are like absolute biological outliers.
Yep.
And they're athletic outliers because of their training and preparation. And because their general athletic preparation is so high and their performance is so high, yeah, of course they played multiple sports in high school because they're studs. it's a very tricky, like, chicken and the egg thing to kind of break down. Like, well, how did we land here, right? Is this person just an elite baseball player because they played football? Well, I mean, sure, football is going to teach you to solve different physical movement problems than baseball will, and certainly there's some beneficial relationship there. But like, the guy's a good baseball player because he plays baseball. The trick for us, and the reason that like every practice we run has probably somewhere between 30 to 40 minutes of non-baseball athletic training, is because we understand how the whole informs the part, right? Like again, we talked about mechanics a while ago, right? And again, I realize I sound like a lunatic when I say this, but like, to me, when you look at guys' mechanics, it's just the expression of a system trying to solve a problem. And the system is going to be defined by strengths and weaknesses, specifically with youth players, right? Because their biological variance is all over the place. They grow all the time. Like every 4 to 6 weeks, their brain has to learn how to re-coordinate their bodies because their limb dimensions change all the time. If we understand that that's like the base layer, then I want to afford myself as a coach some tolerance for variance. But the more that I can kind of develop the system, the more that those mechanics are going to continue to be refined by like this ecology that they bring to the table.
I think also the issue too is, I hate saying this because we're in organized sports, but people want to play organized sports and travel sports across multiple sports. So if I play baseball on a travel club, I want to play in the top travel baseball club, and then I also want to play on the top travel hockey club. Time that doesn't work. Like, it's tough. And I've seen players where they get burnt out because they do the top teams on both sports, where one of my wife's former bosses, we were talking with her about her kids, and her son wants to play travel baseball, and she's totally against it because she's like, you can't do that. You're already on a top soccer club. Mm-hmm. There's no way that we can make that work. Not from a financial standpoint, like we totally can afford it. But the thing is that it's not good for you. And it's just like, choose a strength trainer. Let's go with the strength trainer, and then we'll put you in a rec level baseball team or a lower level team that's just local, and they play 10 or 15 games a year. I think that'd be perfect. And you end up training for your sport, which then also incorporates this whole total body training format.
Yeah, I mean, and just the schedule configuration is really difficult, right? Like, I mean, I think my son was 11 the last time that we had soccer, basketball, and baseball all together. And like, because he is a baseball lunatic, we start our off season in October, it was like, I think November or December, and like basketball was ramping up, soccer was finishing, and we had baseball going on in the background too. And I knew it was a lot, and he's a high energy kid. He listens to me blather about all this stuff all the time. So like, he sleeps well and he eats well. And it was a lot to try to manage. And as a well-intentioned parent who's trying to give my kid the opportunity to play multiple sports, I had to realize it also was just like, I'm square hole round peg, because the amount of activity that he has, unless I let him drop out of school, which I'm not that crazy. Unless I let him drop out, like, how are we going to do all these things together? And it's like, the intention is good, but you can't, like, there have been, let me think about this, Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson, who else? Not a lot of guys, but Danny Ainge was like a multi-sport guy in college, right? Not a lot of guys are able to do this stuff at the highest level in multiple professions.
Jeff Samardzija did it at Notre Dame.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, good call. It's difficult, right? And again, kids are pretty resilient, but they're not bulletproof. But if you're that well-intentioned parent who's like, well, we're going to be on this 7-on-7 football team, and then this AAU team, and this baseball team, man, like, you're just running the ragged edge of that kid's ability to kind of recover from day to day or month to month from, like, again, what is probably just like an overall athletic workload that is too much. But you had good intention.
Like, I think it's great that they're playing multiple sports. It's just I don't think that they should be playing at that high level where the demand is so great, because like example, soccer culture is way more advanced than baseball culture in a lot of cases, where they're flying all over, not just the country, but they'll go overseas and play clubs overseas in Europe. So like that player, it's going to be really tough for them to play an elite level schedule, going to Lake Point and going down to Jupiter. That it doesn't work. The timing doesn't work.
Yeah. And, and for us, because we do run, we run a 10-month program, right? We try to solve for that internally. Number one, by not playing, like a crazy amount of games. We try to have some balance in that system. We don't have a crazy schedule on like a week-to-week basis. Our 14 U's are practicing 3 days a week. And sometimes I would like to see, some additional practice if that was a thing that we can make work. But again, what do I understand about just like general athletic performance and development, right? You're not necessarily getting better in the weight room. You're getting better at the way that you recover after the weight room, right? If you want to take advantage of the super compensation thing, you need to have rest and recovery that fuels the growth that you from the work that you put in. Well, if we have soccer practice on Monday, Wednesday, and games on Sunday, and we have baseball practice Tuesday, Thursday, and games on Saturday, and then I'm like trying to fit in like 7-on-7 and 5-on-5 football somewhere around that too, where's the recovery coming from, right? So to a degree, it's kind of like what we were talking about the kid throwing 60-pitch bullpens on a Friday and a Sunday, right? Your inability to recover is putting you in an overtrained state, so you're never taking advantage of the super compensation thing to actually get better. You may be able to participate in all these things, but is skill, strength, force, technique, are all these things actually improving? And again, at the end of the day, the reason that we are so attached to kind of data, measuring the stuff that matters to us, and then communicating that stuff clearly to our parents and players is because if we're in that system, I get real clear understanding when we are fatigued, right? Like if I was running a club swimming organization and I didn't use a stopwatch, if time started to go down, it's like, hey, I got a really clear indicator something's not working. But if I never kind of check into the velocity development progression of these 60-pitch bullpens on Friday and Sunday, Friday, Sunday, Friday, Sunday, if a kid was like 60, 63, 65, 63, 65, and then they go 61, 63, and then they go 58, 63, and then they go 57, 58, there is just like, that's overtraining, right? It's overtraining. We're in a bad spot. But if I don't leverage a ruler, right, which is, I mean, that's what a radar gun is. We're just measuring output. If I don't ever take a look at that information, I miss the opportunity to understand what direction am I going, up or down? Is skill development and acquisition going up or down? And again, velocity, and it comes to on the throwing side of things, right? It should be an expression of everything we want, right? If your mechanics are good and your strength is good and your ability to sequence those mechanics together and leverage your strength and leverage your stability, what would be the natural outcome of that? You're going to throw the ball harder. And again, MLB PitchMart, they have on their website, they say that they don't want kids, throwing to a radar gun. And I understand the impetus of what they're trying to drive towards that, right? I would never, and again, I've done this in Little League, right? I didn't bring out the radar gun in practice on day one. I brought out the radar gun at the end of week 3, beginning of week 4 to understand where we were in terms of velocity, and now I can monitor for it from that point forward.
I also think they were trying to lump in like the dads that were buying the pocket radars and
how are you
and sitting behind home plate.
What are you using the tool for?
And radaring every kid.
Yeah.
Well, I know. I mean, I have a kid. I have a kid who isn't in our organization anymore. He's a good kid, and and he throws the ball really hard. And if he just kind of continues to do what he's doing, he should have a good shot to play college baseball. he isn't in our program anymore, but I still, I know what he's doing on socials, right? And like, I see him just out there, just like randomly throwing all the time, and it's like,
why?
Yeah, and there's a gun there, and it's like, the number just kind of is like flatlining.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why? Because we're not taking the time off. We don't have structure to be able to kind of get us to the place we want to go. So yeah, man, I think for a lot of people, if you don't have any idea of like what a structured throwing program looks like, don't bring out the radar gun, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure, don't do any type of high intent throwing. Like don't do that. I can't tell you the amount of flack that I've gotten, on social media about when we have our kids do pull downs. But like,
they don't know why.
Do that because of the specific progression that we take to get there. Right. Like you can't go from A to Z. You have to go through the entire alphabet of how we get there. And it's a complicated process.
That one of my favorite authors, Ryan Holiday. I don't know if you've read his books. He came out with a tweet, and I sent it to Dave, and it's just the epitome of like Twitter, and it's dogs bark at what they cannot understand. Heracles, and I feel like purchasing knowledge is so underrated, and being able to, like, if I don't know something, and being able to go to a Driveline or go to a Tigers or go to whatever, the club or the training program, I think the value in that is so big, because then you start understanding your body and you start understanding what actually works, and you're relying on someone like yourself who has devoted 10, 15, 20 years of your life to this craft. Like, I think the knowledge that you have is extremely important for someone to grasp, and just being able to learn from just even this podcast, because this podcast is free. Mm-hmm. This podcast is free, and you've just dropped so many knowledge bombs that I think people can take away something from this podcast. And then if they want to learn more, really search that stuff out, because that's the stuff that's going to really help. If your kid wants to play professional baseball or play college baseball, these are the things, these are the paths that you have to take. Or if you don't, you're going to end up getting your arm run through, or your body's going to break down, and you're not going to be able to accomplish that goal. But again, you have to understand, is that something that your kid wants, or do they just want to play the game? And that's another thing.
Yeah, and to me, to be really clear, the thing that I focus on most is really just for kids to be able to have like a competitive but resolved high school baseball experience. Yeah. That's the first thing for me that I care about, just because I don't want kids' most impactful experiences in this game take place before they hit puberty. Like that for me is just where it all starts. And to me, to be able to be in that space, you have to have a good technical understanding of the game. You have to have competitive tools, and you need to be able to have a mindset that allows you to kind of work through this perseverance. Like my son, is going to be trying out for his high school baseball team next year, and he has this idea of like, I want to make freshmen he want to make varsity as a freshman, and I'm like, not sure that you really even want that. Because for a lot of guys, if you make varsity as a freshman, you might just be backing up. You might be watching a lot, and again, how are you going to continue to like learn and grow and improve your game? Well, probably through play and reps, right?
It's a difference between prestige and versus actually enjoying, right?
Right, because again, life is simultaneously very short, but also I think kids under-index for like the amount of time that they have in front of them. Like you got 4 years, man. Like ideally, you have 4 years to really kind of grow and learn your way into this game. And whether any like future play at the collegiate professional level takes place after that, man, I kind of don't care, because I think my objective of creating kids that just get a chance to see what 90-foot baseball is in high school. Whether they do anything beyond that is whatever. What I'm really trying to solve for is for when that young man or woman eventually has a family and they have a child, and you, at that point, you're in the driver's seat for like, what sports do you introduce to your child? I remember very clearly, my wife and I called it Morgan family spring training. and I was playing like beer league softball at the time. And we took our kids down to a field, and we brought like the giant, like the Bam Bam bat, right? And some wiffle balls. We went down to just a local field, and we just hit around for a bit, right? And there's a picture that I have of my son and I, and then I hit some or whatever. My kids are like, oh, dad hits the ball really far. I don't. But like, they were tiny. And there's this picture of my son and I walking in from the outfield, picking up balls, and he's like yay high, right? Whether anything evolves for him in terms of like post high school, I don't care. I already feel like our journey in this was successful because both of my kids love the game. And I feel really confident that at some point, if afforded the opportunity, they will put a baseball in their kids' hands.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Hey, let's go play catch. Let's go hit around. All the other stuff past that is gravy if it happens, and I kind of don't care if it doesn't. I just want to get more kids that like love this game the way that I do, because I know how it shaped and formed me as a human being, as a parent, as a husband, as a father. I know all this stuff that baseball has taught me, and that to me is what growing the game is, right? So to me, growing the game is not identifying biological outliers and trying to like get those kids to play MLB baseball. I understand that like that is a thing that we could do, and it's great to develop high-level elite baseball talent in this country. I agree with that intention. There are another million and millions and millions of people that we can teach to love this game, that want to introduce it to their children, and want to cultivate everything that this game can teach you as a person. That's my North Star. Everything else from that is just kind of it's icing on top of the cake.
That's
game adoption is probably the single most important thing, in my opinion. Yeah. So,
and just real quickly, like the thing that we kind of talked about before is like, how do we capture these kids who have all these other options? To me, it's gamification, right? Like my kid can sit down and play NBA 2K, MLB The Show, Fortnite, Call of Duty, and whether he wins a bunch of games or loses a bunch of games, he gets XP. He literally has like, there is value that's communicated from the game to him about the benefit of participation regardless of win-loss. So the reason that like in the Skills at Scale book, and the reason that like we talk about this idea of like games outside of the game and giving points, is that's the loop I'm trying to run.
Yeah.
I'm trying to go that like, hey, when we talk about bullpens, right, there's a video on our YouTube about this idea of just like a levels bullpen game, right? We do like 10 throws at one distance, 10 throws in another distance, 10 distance at a third. I've had kids in like rec little league that if I put them on a 46-foot bump, they are not going to be able to smell the strike zone, right? They're just not going to. And a lot of times what happens is that like coaches will throw those bullpens with kids. The kid can't smell the broadside of a barn, and you just go, that kid's not a competitive pitcher. And you just kind of carve them out, right? What I want to do is like, okay, let's approach it like soccer. Let's decrease task difficulty, and we're going to play a game. Hey, you're going to have 10 throws at this distance. How many points can you score? Okay, we scored 8 points at a very drastically reduced distance. Okay, and then we scored 6 points at like a middle distance, and then we only scored like 3 points at like the actual competitive distance. The moment that I establish a score there, it affords me the opportunity next week to go like, hey, you hit for 3 at 46 feet last week. Let's try to shoot for 5.
100%. 100%.
I'm trying to teach these kids that, like, again, this is like Casey Weathers one-on-one, man. Like, hard work will give you honesty. The more that you continue to do these things, the more that you sharpen your sword. Success is not going to be immediate, but you will gain the truth about where you actually landed if you just keep getting in the reps. And everything else is going to be based on luck and God and good fortune and good vibes and stuff that I can't control as a coach. But I just want kids to kind of learn.
Yep. It sets them up for structure. It sets them up to actually win outside of the game, which is awesome. Deven, this conversation has been, again, another, like, I feel like there has to be a round 3. I mean, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And hopefully we can do one of these in person at some point, maybe down in the Dallas ABCA or something like that. But I mean, again, I appreciate your time. And guys, if you're on Twitter, make sure you give him a follow. It's at Deven Morgan. It's Deven. And just engage with him. Like, he's putting out some good stuff. That's one thing about Twitter and baseball community. Sometimes we're just very passive. Really engage with him. He'll respond back. And that's how we've started our relationship, and go from there.
Go back and listen to this a few times. Yeah. Lots of good information in here.
Deven, do you have anything that you want to let the audience know what you're working on, anything like that?
Yeah, man. We should have something coming out soon where we're going to bundle our youth baseball development certification, which is very much aimed at like a 90 to 120 day Little League season. It's like just a way to kind of help coaches understand what took me like 12 years to wrap my head around. It's a certification course you can complete in a weekend. We're going to be bundling that with our Skills to Scale practice book. We should have that live in a couple days, so it'll be ready for coaches that are going into their seasons in February. It's just all about how to kind of execute some of these ideas about like a positivity, engagement, and skill-driven approach to just recreational team baseball. And I've had high school coaches go through that course. And they said that it's good. We've had several, I think we're getting close to 3,000 people that have done it. So, I think it's okay. We're bundling that with the Skills at Scale book because, again, that's a lot more about like how can you construct and implement these fun games in practice that drive towards this thing. So that should be live pretty soon. And then sometime later this year, we'll be doing like the actual big everything that we think is directionally correct about kind of youth training. I don't know if we're going to call it Hacking Youth Baseball. I don't know if we're going to call it That Damn Baseball Book, but it's going to be it's large. The rough draft is about 55,000 words right now, and there's probably more polish that needs to be put onto it. So that thing will be coming down the pipe. I'm just, I feel really fortunate to be able to have this opportunity to work at Driveline and have them kind of support this initiative that what we're trying to do is just like make the game better, and I think we can approach that from both ways. I think we can improve recreational baseball at the lowest level of the game. And that part is something that I'm just incredibly passionate about because, man, that's just where it starts for a lot of kids. I think we can do that. I think we can, do some of this other stuff that ABCA wants to do and I want help with about improving the other side of things, kids that are a little bit more focused on baseball. I think we can serve both. And so long as all of it moves towards, again, solving the same problem that all of us have to deal with, I hope that, I hope that we can get everybody on the same page. It's just like baseball is in a weird place right now. Like this tremendous influx in travel ball has definitely had some positive benefits, but it also having some negative repercussions, not only within, kids leaving rec ball, but also within travel ball itself. And again, the one thing that I'll come back to is if you just look at like USA Baseball's website, the national governing body, they've already identified kind of the ideals that I would hope that we can be in agreement on. We aren't. Like there's a lot of disagreement. You go on these fields, man, and there's a ton of animosity. And just like the environment can be really toxic. And the thing we didn't even talk about today is like how this is going to affect our game if we don't have umpires, because that's a problem. Oh, yeah.
We need umps to play our game. And because we don't have a trailing generation of 25 to 35-year-old umpires, or even I think the 35 to 45s, unless we change our environment, we're going to have real problems, right? You're just going to have like one-man crews or coach umpired games, which is going to mean that coaches can't coach. They have to umpire. A lot of these things are just like systemic problems. Yep. So my hope is that we can get everybody on the same page, that we need to start working together to solve them. And for me, this is all that I care about other than my wife and my family and a small circle of friends. So, absolutely. Next time, man, let's do this one in person. And if there's anything, that I can do to help push this game forward, man, that's what I think it's the only thing that I'm supposed to be doing in my life. So I'm trying to do it.
Deven, thank you so much for your time. Guys, make sure that you subscribe to the show. Give a follow to Deven. You can follow us. My handle is @SpikerHelms. Tweet at us. David's is David_Berkby. Until next time, see ya.
Thanks, guys.